Hello, and thanks for attending this afternoon. For the next 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to look at a series of contrasts. Well, even more than that. Let's call them contradictions. In the end, I hope you find that the contradictions are closer to truisms, and what has been accepted as standard practice has actually hurt us, especially as it applies to growth companies and their leadership. So, consider this framework for the typical executive selection process. Now, of course, before you start, you've already done your pre-work of assessing the need, crafting requirements for the position, writing a job description, etc., etc. That is a given, but now you have to get down to business. What is done first? Well, you fill the funnel almost any way you can. We show the typical external or internal referrals or paying for a service, whether human or screen-based. Then you get resumes. You start pouring through them. Then on to interviews. If you find someone you like, you do background checks and reference calls. And if that's okay, you start putting together an offer letter. So what do we have here? I'd argue that you're just checking boxes. You're going through the rote process that people have been doing since the 1950s when traditional large company management theory was established. Nothing much has changed. But frankly, I'd argue that it's much worse than that. Why? This sequential check the box view leads to a meet the standard approach, kind of a good enough mentality. You filled the position and God knows how hard it is to find people. So guess what? You're happy. You met the goal of getting the seat filled. But the thing you didn't do in the process is look at all the dimensions of the person and optimize across those dimensions that are required for the job. You couldn't have. You didn't even look at the dimensions, let alone measure them. But then again, it's even worse than that. You have fallen into the impression or the opinion trap. Not only did you not optimize the selection, you set up a predetermined prejudice at the very beginning of the process by putting undue faith in the referral or getting an overly positive or negative stray comment after an interview. So let's stop there. First, it isn't your fault. Humans are hardwired to shortcut decisions and use crutches to get through life. Opinions from people we trust help guide us more quickly to a decision. Look at Amazon or any other buying site. Why all the comments and ratings? Is it really meant to benefit you? Well, yes, to some extent, but these buying sites also know that it helps move you along the buying process. Unfortunately, these same opinions, if we don't recognize them and compensate, cloud our judgment and provide false positives during the interview process. The best thing you could do in your hiring is to not take referrals, at least verbally, not conduct standard interviews. And I would go as far to argue, even look at resumes before you first go through an optimization process to match the candidate as an executive leader to what is entailed in the job. Let me try to explain why and what we do at Grilligence to identify high-performing leaders and teams. When it comes to people, there are many things you could measure. And if you're one of the progressive companies, you probably have some sort of screening conducted as part of identifying people for your organization. Of course, I'm talking about more than a background check or drug screening. Typically, these tests would be related to personality, either a generalized Big Five test or an 8 or 16 factor type test. And there are many. This is all well and good and may help you to get to know the person's external behaviors and confirm why you might like them. But frankly, that's about all it does. Let's face it, there are many measures we can do on a person, but make no mistake, when it comes to high performance, we need to look far beyond personality. In fact, there are four things that matter with personality only being a partial determinant. At Grilligence, we call it the four performance vectors: persona, personality, intellect, and instinct. You see them listed here. These are the measures that have to be optimized and correlated to identify the very top performing individuals when it really matters in your organization. So what makes you you? Well, it's a combination of three things: your core personality, or your affective portion, your intellect or your cognitive portion, and instinct or your conative part of you. So we're going to delve into those deeper, but it's probably important to discuss persona a bit first. In every test and assessment we are aware of, personality is personality. In other words, the assessments measure the observed external behavior of a person, the traits and patterns that we can observe, with no attempt to dissect the persona component. Again, this is okay and what is generally accepted in the world of psychology, but what we have found, though, is that to zero in on top performance, you have to bifurcate personality. In our process, we strip off that laminate layer that we call persona. It's not that it isn't important. It's extremely important. So important that we want to measure it distinctly. Well, why? It's because it's powerful in its ability to persuade, energize, fool, lead along. It's so powerful that it can mask the lower levels of the core personality, leading to false positive or negative readings. More than that, though, persona is where some important traits reside, such as charisma, magnetism, aura. As you can imagine, these attributes are important for CEOs and sales leaders in general. So, enough of persona. The real make and break factors of performance are below that, in the core personality, intellect, and instinctual layers. Let's look at these a little further. As we go deeper, we come to what we call the performance triad. It is a triad because although each vector is independent and important, they do come together to influence each other, either enhancing or diminishing constituent subvectors. In short, personality is action-reaction. Intellect is reflection and intention. And finally, instinct is the lowest level innervation, pure gut motivation, striving, or repulsion at the subconscious level. Outside of religions, I've never seen this vector used as a potential performance measure, but it's absolutely essential to both individual performance and high-performing team synergies. So, getting to team. We can take the three core vectors drawn as gears, and as they mesh to move and propel an individual, they also mesh together to mobilize a team. So again, each layer or vector is important. Now you may be fully compatible at, say, the personality level, which by the way is the superficial level at which most companies measure, but a complete mismatch with respect to intellect. This could be shown up as a missing piece, or those green arrows there. In other words, someone just can't pull their weight. The rest of the team is always taking 2 steps back to clarify things for this person. Has this ever happened to you on a team? Worse yet, is this your CEO? Another example here is out of balance. So out of balance that something explodes. This is kind of that orange set of arrows and the explosion. So this is illustrated at the instinctual level, or that vector. And although destruction can happen at any layer, let's explore this one outcome. So as an example, this non-thinking innate instinct, it's inextricably linked to problem solving, especially under pressure. One category of cognitive behavior is a person that needs to build or model something to solve a problem. Other common connotations involve conceptual projections, or another might be trial and error. Now imagine the person that unwaveringly needs to build and model to solve a problem being dominated in a team of 8 or 10 conceptualists. After a while, the one builder, he's driven crazy. They throw up their hands and storm out of the room, sending a shock through the team as it has to reconfigure. When something like this happens, I kind of in my mind's eye see those predominantly two-dimensional gears and imagine them in 3D. And this is what you get, an imminent explosion. So what is needed to navigate these layers and vectors? Well, it's kind of like the three-dimensional chess game you see on Star Trek episodes. You have to map, measure, and optimize all dimensions to find the exact top performer you need as your company leader or next hire. And again, it's not just the independent measures of each vector, it's the cross correlation that's also important. That's where we see performance components that are amplified or alternatively negated. It might be good to step through this and doing so kind of get a review of what we've been talking about. So in the four vectors, again, we have persona, or what we impress upon people. Personality, kind of the action, reaction, judging, collaborating. Intellect, or our intelligence, absolutely, but also how we process logic and deal with ambiguity. Instinct, then, is the final vector. How we're motivated, how we persist, how we perform under pressure and stress. So those are the four in short. Now, process-wise, we bifurcate personality and persona so that we can get an assessment and construct an independent vector for persona. Then we use a proprietary mix of best-in-class assessment tools, each researched and vetted for 20 or more years. And just to emphasize, most companies today that utilize human capital methodologies stop at the personality level. Well, I take that back. They may at times do a general intelligence test. The problem is these are completely independent, a go, no go, or as we discussed to begin with, just a checkbox for them. What is hidden and essential for top performance at Grilligence is the cross correlation of the four vectors. For example, let's take intellect. As an independent vector, intellect is really not a determining factor of top performance or overall success, but it does measure baseline thinking capacity. In other words, how much you can absorb and at what rate. One of the many cross correlations we look at Grilligence are subvectors within intellect and instinct. Most specifically, where a high-speed intellect matches well with an instinct that is dominant in conceptual brainstorming. So this balance and optimization across vectors is critical. We have 2 decades of operational experience in this methodology, and our partnership with best-in-class assessment partners allows us to bring to market the most advanced progressive tool for identifying C-level and other top-performing leaders. We are dedicated to improving the performance of thousands of growth companies and in turn positively impacting its leadership, their families, communities, and the investors backing these endeavors. I want to thank you for attending today, and it looks like we have a couple minutes for questions.